Gym owners, you know that you need to track numbers to really understand the health of your business. As someone that coaches a lot of gym owners, I understand it can feel overwhelming, it can feel unwieldy, there's a lot of different things you could track, and you're pulling all on the spreadsheets, it's annoying. Well, I've got great news. In this video, I'm going to show you the dead simplest approach to understand at a high level the exact numbers you need to know to quickly assess the health of your business and understand what needs to happen to make things better. My name is Mark Fisher from businessforunicorns.com, and if you like this video, and particularly if you want some help figuring out what numbers you should be tracking so we can do in your business, you might want to check out the Unicorn Society. That's Business for Unicorns group of training gym owners where you'll get personal coaching from myself, Michael Keeler, Pete Dupuis, Ben Pickard, and this is exactly the kind of thing that we help with so that you can create order from the chaos. For more about the Unicorn Society, click the link in the description box below. Now, let's talk about these numbers. I promise you, this should be pretty simple. Now, I want to make space. Some of you, depending on your relationship with numbers, what is happening or maybe not with your profit and loss, this might be a little bit trickier. Number one, very simple, revenue. This is how much money came in, how much income you made in a given month before any expenses are netted out. So how much revenue did you make last month? Number two, expenses, right? So none of this is rocket science here, but we want to understand, okay, well, out of the money that came in, how much money did you spend? Now, I do think with expenses, we want to break it out a little bit more. I would break down your expenses into 4 buckets: rent, payroll, owner pay and perks, everything else. Now, for a lot of gyms, these are going to be the most substantial categories. And admittedly, depending on the way you pay yourself and how your business is incorporated, particularly if you're pulling this out of a P&L, your owner pay may or may not be a large part of your expenses. The reason I like these 4 buckets is I think it's good to look at a glance and understand your really biggest expenses, which are generally going to be payroll, rent, and then the other things. Because here's the other secret is if you're putting this in your spreadsheet, you can also build in some formulas to allow you to quickly understand the ratios or the percentage of each of these categories in relation to the amount of revenue. So hypothetically, let's say you're making $30,000 and out of the $22,000 of expenses, $4,500 is going towards rent. If we do the math of it, that's 15% of your revenue is going towards rent. It's a little bit on the high side, maybe for rural or suburban markets. Pretty decent if you're in a more urban market where rent factors tend to be higher. Now, of course, when you subtract expenses from revenue, you get profit, and this is how much money is left over. I want to remind you briefly, for those that have not watched my previous trainings on finance, a profit and loss is a tax treatment. What that means is there might be, for instance, very large expenses, or I should say very large investments you make into the business that don't show up on your expense item because they show up on the balance sheet. So without getting into the weeds of this, I just want to make the point that your profit and loss is not a perfect map onto your actual cash statements. But nonetheless, like many things in the world, it is an incomplete model, but still a useful one. Next is where things get interesting, and that is, what is the net owner benefit? So the net owner benefit is a combination of any pay you take from the business on payroll, which will likely show up as an expense, any distributions you take, which in many cases won't show up at all, at least on the profit and loss, and then any perks that you take for the business. And these can be things like health insurance, if you're putting maybe a cell phone through the business, or maybe your car. Now, here's again what's great about this. If you know what your revenue is, if you know what the expenses are, and you break it down to those 4 buckets, and you know the profit, and importantly, you know the net owner benefit, those numbers alone, you get a pretty good sense of what's going on with the business. Now, there are a lot of other numbers that are important to understand what needs to be happening, but I gotta tell you, that's kind of one-stop shopping. If I can get a gander at that, particularly if I'm looking at a rolling 3-month average, just in case there's any kind of spikes, I can quickly assess the overall health of your business. Now, 2 other numbers that I would offer for us to add into our soup here are how many clients, how many active clients you have, and monthly churn. And monthly churn is nothing more than the percentage of your clients that you're losing every month. Now, once you have total clients and monthly churn and total revenue, well, the great news is you can now do some crude approximations to understand what is the average total monthly revenue per client. And because we know churn, we can also figure out what is the approximate lifetime customer value. And if I were to give you one other bonus number I'd recommend checking out, I think it's actually valuable as the gym owner, something I want to know when working with someone, is how many hours are you working on the floor? Because in practice, if you're doing 45 hours on the floor or you're doing no hours on the floor, it's a very different quality of life. And while the numbers tell us a lot broadly about the health of the business, in practice, when I'm working with a client, I also want to understand, what is the life that you want? What do you want to be doing? Because for some people, 35 hours on the floor, well, I'd say for most people, it's probably too much to be able to really run the business and really have freedom. Depending on what you want, I think more often than not, we're hoping to live no more than 15 hours per week on the floor. And if you have a mature enough business and you don't want to be on the floor at all, well, guess what? You own the business. That's totally cool. Now, it's hard to give you much context for what these numbers should or shouldn't be, because it depends a lot on the maturity of the business, the market you're living in, and again, importantly, what it is that you want from your life. But if you're not tracking anything, at least at a high level, you start tracking that on a monthly basis, you'll really understand the overall health of the business. And then from there, of course, yes, we're eventually going to want to chunk it down and understand things like how many leads are we getting, how many sales appointments, how many new memberships. And a lot of those numbers we'll probably want to track weekly. But for now, on the month, that's a high level stuff to understand financially what's going on with your business. And if you want to get a little bit more into the nerdery of how expenses might break out, well, you might enjoy checking out my video where I say I run a multi-million-dollar gym and here's how I spend my money. You can find that video in the description box below, which conveniently means your cursor is going to pass over the opportunity to subscribe. So maybe hit the subscribe, the All right, friends, as always, if you want to learn more about Business for Unicorns, head over to businessforunicorns.com, and I'll see you next time for another video where I will share more actionable tips, psychological frameworks, and philosophy.